deepest signs of devotion, people willingly go out of their way to find, as part of their spirituality, the belief that their access to the God of life requires internalizing servility, being a docile servant. Now this all works in an amazing way, and Professor Horsley already talked about in Constantine. So people know that it was the emperor, Constantine, when he established Christianity, that actually convened the ecumenical councils. So what have you been probably told in the school books? There's two possibilities. One is through the court historian, Eusebius, that the empire was the vehicle that prepared the road for the spread of Christianity. Without Roman roads, how could the missionaries travel? Without a common language, Latin, how could the gospel be communicated? And so on. In fact, it is interesting that this so-called pagan king, who didn't formally apparently convert until his deathbed, convened the council of all the bishops because he was so scandalized that there was division among Christians. So one of the three questions we have to ask about this is, how did it serve the empire, and how did it captivate us that Constantine was so involved in the debates around the divinity of Christ and around the unity of the Trinity? Why would the Roman Empire particularly care that the triune God was not dividable into three persons? Why is it a high stake that Jesus is both human and divine in an integral way? That the emperor himself would supervise these tedious theological debates? Why was it so important that the councils be ecumenical? All had to come, ecumenical, worldwide. And why was it so important that the tool of heresy was introduced, that you would be cut out of the circle if you didn't absolutely agree? That it wasn't written out anywhere that there had to be a single standard for Christian belief that absolutely obliterated, wiped off the map, diversity of opinion. That absolutely made it impossible to have culturally appropriate expressions of the Christian faith. There was only one ecumenical standard, and the God that was worshipped was one. And interestingly enough, followed the rules of a single, all-powerful monarch. No sharing of power within the Trinity. There was, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I'll take this. No, I'm kidding. So the question that John Douglas Hall asks in an article, a Canadian theologian, is exactly that: is what makes Christianity so attractive to empires? And I'm beginning to give the first answer, is that the principle of unity, not in the good sense of the solidarity. So for these purposes, although a lot I talk about, as Naem and others know, encouraging unity among the church. But in this sense, it was the unification of imposed criteria. And this was important for one empire, one rule, required a theological standard that gave the false reverse impression. As God is one, we have one empire. There is but one revealed truth. We have but one set of loyalties and an unquestionable power and authority in the hands. So that the very creeds that we cherish and their ecumenical nature can be many things. So you can go back to those creeds and wonder to what degree they represent a reflection of your belief in God. But whatever else they do, what they do represent, as Professor Horsley said, was a loyalty oath to empire. In fact, the very word faith, fides, simply means that. And that's why I'm much happier that we have here today faithfulness, which is a more correct interpretation of pistis, is it not? So we have unity. So that's the first thing. You have to obliterate particularities and you have to emphasize unity and universality. Now, we want to emphasize common humanity, but not common control. Now, this is very interesting that this same image goes back in that long arc we talked about, that one of the first images of empire in the Bible kind of theoretically begins and ends with the fall of empire. The Tower of Babylon in Genesis, and that is an image of Nimrod, the mighty, the first warrior and potentate, gathers all the people together. It said there were many people. They spoke many languages. They occupied many lands. And then just with a blink, you go to the next chapter and says, and there in Babel they spoke only one language. Everybody brought together under a unified criteria. God's saving act, and you know in the Old Testament when God comes down, it is to save. So God didn't come down to have an on-the-ground inspection, but to intervene in a situation of brokenness. And God's liberating act in the Tower of Babel, unlike how we've been told how it contrasts with Pentecost, people were freed to speak their own languages and go back to their own lands. To speak their own languages and occupy and live in their own lands. That's a saving act before you get to the Exodus. You then go to the book of Revelation. You have chapter 18, and again, the fall of Babylon. But just to say, we have under one of the issues we have in the church is that this idea, even if we consider ourselves of the critical or free church traditions, the idea that there's a fundamental orthodoxy about common belief and that's straying from that path. It's very interesting. I don't know, how many people have studied a little bit of church history? You know, yeah, okay, quite a few, all right. So if I say, for instance, the Donatists, does that mean anything to anybody? Donatism? If somebody raises their hand, I'll keep going. If not, no. Okay, so Donatists, little obscure thing here, but basically there's a group of many heresies in Africa. Because in the time just after the Constantinian accommodation, and I'm quoting now from an author who says, one of the most striking aspects of African Christianity in the 3rd century was its absolute uncompromising hostility to the Roman Empire. In the great imperial church, embracing the people in a single mass, they saw a secularized Babylon. And they expressed that by a doctrine of separation. And where there's persecutions, and the Roman authorities would come in and confiscate the holy books and burn them, then after that passed, the same people that handed over the books to be burned want to be bishops in the church. And the Donatists said, absolutely no way. If you've collaborated with oppression, you're not fit to lead the people. And this was held up as one of the most vile aspects of heresy. The idea that you would hold people accountable for the resistance to empire was considered heresy. I could go on, and I won't, but my point is there a part of our history, although we have exceptions? If you're feeling smug as a Protestant, because you say we left all that behind as we emerged from the Protestant Reformation, don't feel so smug. Because the introduction of Protestant pietism allowed very soon, together with the second wave of the Enlightenment, us to do the other thing that John Hall say, empire